Are you on?
It's like peekaboo with your fucking kid. Yeah, I'm on.
Okay. Hello. Hey. Hi. Today we're going to cover the Jeep again. The low center LSA powered Jeep. Welcome back. We talked about this Jeep last time. This is another Jeep update. I told you it was going to be complete last time, and it's not complete, but it's updated. The next time you see it, I promise it will be outside and it'll be under its own weight and a rolling, a roller, because it's not going to get wired or plumbed or painted here. We're just doing the meat and potato and all of the custom work. So let's check this thing out. Trying to kind of recoup what we covered last. I know for sure the rear fenders were a thing, talking point. So these are done. I'm just going to kind of go over things that I know have been updated. Rear fenders complete, welding complete, rear bumper spare modification installation, rear sway bar installation to frame, finalization of the cradle back here, air compressor mount, battery mount, exhaust, full exhaust, fuel cell or fuel tank, like cradle modifications, solid body mounts, our trim piece, which is my last thing I want to cover, cooler mounting up front with some revisions that we'll have to get into. Air filter, big doink air filter. All accessories mounted, S-Pod, ECU, fuse box, winch controller, everything in a home. Steering box connected to steering wheel. What else? Think that's gonna do most of it, and I might come up with stuff. So that's kind of our short list. We'll go over to the whiteboard too and maybe look at that towards the end to see what else has to be done, and I'll kind of conceptually cover that stuff with you guys after I go over what's been done right now. I know the Jeep is a different vehicle from our typical kind of off-road pre-runner stuff, but we give it the same amount of care, if not more, and definitely the same amount of design and thought process with everything here. It's a special truck. It's always sitting up high because we work under it, but I can't wait to see it when it's actually on its ride height with the 42s on there with walkers, and just, it's gonna be low and squatted and just proper. So let's get into it. Last time we had I think I was holding up tubes. I just had like a rough, like, look at this thing, it's cool. You know, instead of this actually fixed onto the car. I want to just go over the fronts a little bit, just to kind of show you the shapes. There's a profile here that's consistent with this top surface of the hood. Not so much that bulge there, but really the middle portion, that's the overall shape of the hood, and we wanted to kind of tie that into the fender work and the shapes there. What these fenders start off as is a rolled piece of 1.5" chrome moly tube, and then we pop the right bends in them. But even more than that, you know, the bend is in there, and then we kind of adjust the plane and the pitch. So if you had this tube just, you know, 90 and you set your bend there, and then you kicked it over, it would actually upset the bend. So there's a lot of thought process into where we're placing these and the angle that they're sticking out, and same with the actual width of how much fender comes out from the body, with how consistent that is with the tire package. So the axles are not that wide. This spread is about half of the tire tread at the farthest point here. So it's moderate, but it's not too much stick out. And I just wanted to kind of touch on the front there, because the most important thing is building the rears to match these guys. And that's what we have back here. So there's a lot of work in this, and I don't just mean physical work, but you know, design work and thought process with getting these right. Like one of the other things is there's a lot of just very typical, you know, parallel shapes here, just like the belt line of the window and the part line of the like the hard top and the quarter panel there. So what I wanted to do is make sure that this portion, after this bend, it had some tension kind of pulling down towards the truck, almost like the front fender, where the front peaks towards the middle of the truck and then it pulls down. And you know, you want to get that careful mix of that, where it's not too much, where it's not going down super crazy, where it just looks like it's dropping off, and also where it's not too level, because if it's too level, then it's going to look like you tried to get on that plane there and that angle and you missed it. So finding that happy medium was really important. The overall design of like the construction portion of this is all 1/8 inch plate, 120 wall tube, and then there's also 1/8 inch plate connecting from the quarter here out to this tube. You can kind of see here, there's a tab floating here, and then this is where this plate starts. And you can also see in here all the stitch. So it's not continuously seam welded, but there is stitching that's staggered, right? What that does is, instead of having just standoffs, whether that's just a tube going from this part to the quarter panel, you know, or like a tab, you just have one consistent plate here. What the plate does like that is it makes it so if there's pressure on here, it doesn't just isolate one area of the quarter panel, it kind of disperses the load, so you're not going to damage the body as easily. I mean, obviously anything can happen, but it's just a preventative measure. Another piece here is this trim. So this is 1/8 inch aluminum with countersunk stainless, same as the front. The spacing is all tight and consistent, how it should be. And that is just a trim part. The other cool part about this is the little saddle here. Let's call it a holster. So the bottom of this gets very thin here. So we get our last fastener. Obviously the spread's starting to drop off here with hardware locations. And then this last portion, this would be a really weird place for a fastener to be. And what made sense is if we can just land the coat tail of this thing right into a holster, then if there's any like debris or rock or bush that wants to take that portion and kind of grab it and pull it off, it's got a full register holster here. Where it just indexes into there and it can't come off. Again, you can see, you know, we're spreading the load out where these things land onto the body. So this is what this plate is here. Kind of just a cool area. I really like how the tube miters here, and then it just dives like the notch into here, and it just kind of looks like it's coming from the body. Coming. Same with this area, right? We're still respecting the miter portion of the fabrication here in design. And then, you know, this fender is just a different story. So the front and rear tie in pretty good together. It'll be really nice to see this thing on its tire and wheel package. Again, that's a 42-inch Goodyear on a Walker Evans 17 wheel, real beadlock. But it's always, this truck's been up so high. Every chance, like it's never actually been low because we're always working under it or in the wheel openings. So once we are able to get everything on here and put together and let it sit on the ground, I think it's going to have a really profound stance to it. It's going to be very satisfying to look at. Another thing is this guy's just chilling right now. But this is our filler for fuel. Originally, these trucks or cars or whatever you want to call them, they have the fuel fill. The gas tank is on the passenger side and the fill is on the driver. So there's like a line that goes across. And due to all the chassis modifications and the sheet metal back here, it just didn't make sense, especially with how high the rear end tucks now. It's just a weird constraint on packaging. As far as the fuel delivery goes to the gas tank, we have all stainless. That's almost built like header style, where you have sections of it and then we'll just weld it. We have all stainless going from this guy through that hole there, right behind the reservoir, and then over to the stock fuel tank. We also modified some of the skid for the fuel tank, so you can see kind of the bracketry here. instead of having what it had originally, which was really generic kind of strapping tab that was deep into where our cutout is now. Another thing to note over here before we go to the other side is just this is kind of just bolted in here for mock-up to see, but this is our revised body mount for this portion. So there is a B, and a C body mount in this portion, and then there is a D body mount back here. We had to make new body mounts for the C-pillar just because of the up travel that the rear end has now, and you know, the actual link bars are just way, you know, there's no way we would have been able to run anything there that was OEM. So just got these guys, they're sitting on like a isolation pad, and then obviously they're notched exactly for the link bars that go there. Again, you can see the driver's side fender. They're just kind of a satisfying thing to look at, but there's also a lot of tight tolerances that had to be considered when constructing them. Obviously, the first thing we're going to build to is the tire bumping and articulating and making sure that none of this clashes. So that's, you know, the tire gets close. It's maybe 2 fingers from the inside of this tube. And then you can see, obviously, we didn't want to upset the hardtop line, so this goes right to it. And also the door. So that's another thing where it's we still retained the door gap, so we're not going past that. You can see it still does everything it needs to do. We also had some of the stuff welded in here. I don't think we had all of it, but now you can tell like all of the strike pad area look kind of like a modern elf hat that you put on, you know, like a little dude's like face would be right here, you know. You can see this stuff floating in here, but everything's welded. We have bosses for our dual limit straps, and then also the sway bar. So the actual torsion bar is in there. It's definitely kind of threaded through there the best it can be. Everything's packaged tight, everything's where it needs to be, but this thing's got some really cool saddles here. This is an 1.25" 35 spline, so it's not super big boy stuff. It still gives some articulation where we need it. So when you're doing sheet metal like this, I mean, we had to cut out a lot of the factory sheet metal, not just on the interior portion of the cab, but also on the wheel openings. And there's layers. If you ever like work on these things, they're just a lot of layers. So you can see all the welding's done inside and out. And I think that's a good transition for us to go scope out all the final welding inside the cab. Let's move in here. This thing's got some debris, so I'm gonna take care of that really quick here. Alrighty, this thing was tacked last time for sure for the update, so everything's been welded. There is some, I think we talked about running like storage tie down things, so these are just like billet chingaderases that you get. They pivot, they kind of push and pull and pivot, and we're just gonna hit them in all the corners, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's just gonna solidify this thing a little bit. Yeah, it's simple back here. I think it's refined. It's not like some crazy intricate stuff. It makes sense, and we tried to just keep not doing that cross tube. Kept some provisions just for soft goods. I figure like what this layout looks like, if you were gonna do like a loadout for going camping or crawling or something, or just going on a trail, probably have toolboxes or any kind of hard stuff down here, and then you can, like, if you had tents or sleeping bags or blankets or anything like that, you can kind of just stuff back here accordingly. So that's why we'll have solid strap stuff. We're gonna have another tie off going down to the chassis under there, so it's not just tugging on the sheet metal. But yeah, this is completely sealed now, so everything's welded. I'll put the seats down just so you can see the other side too. Came out really good. One of the things I know that comes up is silicone bronze. So when you see like the gold welds, that's silicone bronze weld. What it is it's just a much softer, you know, yielding rod where you don't have to put as much heat into the parent materials to get the rod to melt and fuse, and so it's not distorting and creating like surface deformations as easily. I mean, you can still get it no matter what, because heat is heat and metal expands and contracts. But with this stuff, you can really kind of dial down how much heat is going into each area and just keep a uniform panel. There she is. So I just want to touch a little bit on the silicone bronze. There's a big portion of this that just is about not just preparation and amperage, but patience and impulsivity. Like with welding, I've always struggled. I feel like my brain always wants to move faster than the actual process of sitting and TIG welding stuff, and I'm always like, hurry up, or I don't want to wait for stuff to cool off. So the silicone bronze is always like a challenging thing, and it's really coming to fruition with some of this stuff, especially when you weld, you know, you're fabricated like your cold roll steel to cold roll. The stuff where you really go bed shitting is like the portions of factory sheet metal to your steel. It's not as clean. Like whatever they're making cars out of is just not as clean as like cold roll steel. The other thing too, where you get really buttery stuff, is with like tube to sheet metal. That's always the easiest stuff to weld with silicone bronze, and that's where you always get the best results. Especially doing like downhills, or just keeping consistencies where things don't look like they're just melted together, but they have like a consistent overlap or bead. It's always just an ongoing process with improvement. Just touching on the inside here, so all this is fully welded. Chingaderas to the cab. Obviously there's some double stitching, so like you can see on this guy, the other side is completely welded, so I just need to stitch the return or the flange just to hang out, but it doesn't really need a full weld, it's got it already. The access areas for the shock hardware, the upper bolts, this is all finalized with nut plates and our 1024 stainless. So that's done. I think it was Clarke last time, and you can just see everything's zipped up. This thing's really got, I like the direction we went with this thing, because I always see that typical like, oh well, just weld it to the tube and you know blah blah blah, and it's always like very like just kind of pieces put in like a quilt, and not actually taking time to really get good shapes and like a, you know, form-fitting features. So this worked out well. I really like it, and I like how the seats fit. I'll kind of put these back up again, show you what we got here. But just the use of space, like it's very low. No typical cross tube. We still got all of our structure and rigidity without having to do that. I think it's just a different way of thinking, and kind of thinking with original intention. And then, you know, the space for the seat, you just have just enough and you're good. I know we did not have a radiator last time. I know we didn't have huge chimichanga guy here. I know we didn't have any accessories, so we shall dive into this. I just got to get a short person standing device. Okay, going short, guy. So, Joey needs one too. All right, so it's kind of complicated in here. We definitely had the crossover piece last time. All of the fenders and the tube structure with fenders is done. The intake is a crazy thing. This thing, already from the start, like the packaging was crazy, because we had the LSA, the 6L80, the Atlas 2. All those are not like uncommon for Jeep, but what is uncommon is getting this thing at a low ride height with up travel. And that's where things got like really wild. So fitting everything, it's really easy to plant a motor and plant shocks, and then once you start to put all the accessories in, that's when you really have to start using your thinking cap. So that being said, The main thing you probably see is the intake tube, which is pretty spicy. So this is a big RC2 filter, largest thing they have, obviously LSA blower, and then this is just where this fits the cowl of the hood. It's a total innovation hood, but that cowl is lending itself to the perfect space here. What else is nice is there's actually a mesh opening in there for good airflow here. So that's one thing. The fuse box is mounted to the firewall, but it's used like I can't take this off too easily. I might be able to actually. So just like factory, it uses the same pins. So we're not clamping this in a way, we're not nut turning it. This is the same exact kind of bracket with rectangles where this thing locates. It's just a snap-in situation. It's in, it's done. So there's nothing like that's not OEM about that. It's just made out of steel instead of plastic. So what's cool about all these brackets, this is all standoffs from the firewall. So we're not like actually putting nut certs or adding any hardware or mounting surfaces. Like this is all studs and standoffs that were built OEM from the firewall. It's the same with the S-Pod. Like this whole bracket and clip, this is all right into the factory hardware. Same with the bracket for the ECU. And then just, you know, the tolerances are tight. So this thing's, you can still get the cap off for the brake reservoirs. So you're all good. But yeah, same thing, like this is just a very generic way of latching, and it's got little index like key slots in there that are fine-tuned with like the tool we use for that stuff is almost like a dental tool. It's like a little snaky guy with a very fine bit on it that can make some pretty cool details. So accessories in there. You'll see the power steering cooler is here, power steering reservoir and filter, radiator, and then we have a plethora of coolers I'll get to. But if you start like looking at tolerances, everything has a home. Everything is exactly where it can be and needs to be. I know we covered the AC compressor like extension over there for that mount, so I'll touch on that again. And then there's also a blower pump over there. These LSA blowers do require a remote pump and also an intercooler. So we have all that stuff tied in. I can cover that a little lower here. So with Alan, we kind of went back and forth as far as the packaging for all the cooling. What we're looking at here is your CBR radiator for the engine, and then you have an AC condenser, you have a intercooler, and you have a trans cooler. And obviously this is a Jeep, it's not like a hardcore desert machine, so you can run a little smaller cooler. For me, traditionally, I think about like big CBR trans cooler units, things like that. So I was talking about like putting that stuff back behind the cross member and putting it up over, you know, in front of the cross member and over the engine. And he just wanted to kind of keep things just tidy and more low key and not have a bunch of fan noise too. That was one thing, is just having all the fans on. Alan is going to be driving this on the highway and streets and then onto the trail. So it's not just going to be like a trailer it and then, you know, go hardcore fucking. So everything's on like isolated brackets. Everything comes on and off really easy, and it's all kind of integrated together. These things are floating down here on plate work. I don't think you can really see it, but everything's like a modular unit where it comes off. What we did have to do is redo some of the structure we had here, and that's kind of something that's on the list, is we need to tie this back in. What that looks like, having a tube, there's a junction here that's kind of just dead. So we're gonna start our junction back up here and have it go up and over, and then tie it right back down where it was. And it was just something we kind of had to revise to get all these coolers in here. Everything is root passed on all the frame portions, and you know, all the tube sections, almost everything except like the fenders here. The tube connector area of this is just tacked, but all of the under structure and all the tube structure throughout the chassis is completely root passed. And then obviously that cradle that's under there, that's like under the exhaust, is completely welded and finalized. So one of the big things I did want to show is all the exhaust, and that's kind of the thing I've been saving for last. So big ass PSC box. I'm not familiar with PSC, but I know they do a lot of stuff for crawling and Ultra 4 and like 4-wheel drive applications. This box is probably the biggest box I've ever handled or seen. Whoa, whoa, okay. Factory U-joint on here, and then you know, like a Sweet Manufacturing off-road U-joint, breakaway Heim. So this is our steering situation here. But what it is we're really just connecting factory with modified parts and making it so this thing comes out. And that's part of why this Heim is holding this here. So we can actually unbolt the Heim and then loosen this thing, and everything comes out with ease, where we're not relying on having to take like hard components like the box or somewhere inside the cabin to get the steering shaft out. So that's another thing we've done. The reason I'm in here too is the header. So these are just Hooker LS headers that we've modified. So we put them in here and we kind of built around them, but we knew that first primary on the driver and the passenger side needed to go. It was just right in the way of our inboard shocks. So obviously the coilover is inboard from the frame. So this primary on each side has been redone and tucked to the block, as well as the collector. So where that it had like a, you know, just your kind of janky flange collector, we deleted that. We kicked this whole program with 3-inch and added V-bands to everything. It's the same on the other side, so I'll show you guys that. The work continues. You can see our AC compressor like retrofit bracket here. Worked out pretty well. You can also see the back of the blower pump bracket. So see how kick that primary is. That primary is very tucked now, out of the way of all this, and this is kind of our pocket for the coilover. You can see the welding's all done, a lot of the gusseting here. You can see we've deleted the cast flange that most like header systems come with. It's like just like a 3-bolt triangular looking thing, super janky, always leaking. You know, the bolts come loose, and just running the tried and tested machined flange. The machine ones are super nice because they have a step for the male and female, so they locate really nicely. Also O2 sensor bungs put in a proper area where we can get to them and service them. And then we're going to talk about all this exhaust that's going to start through here, but you can see the start of it right now. So bear with me on going under here. I hope it makes sense through the camera because it's tight in there and I'm looking like this, so hopefully you can follow. But there's some really nice routing with the exhaust. Everything, again, form follows function. So like the packaging with the whole exhaust program is exactly that. You know, we only had one way to go. Once you have 4-wheel drive and it's in a smaller chassis, you know, that side where the transfer case and the drive shaft is for the front axle, it gets tricky. So we'll start in the front and then we'll go to the back. So driver's side, following our header, hugging the, you know, bell housing area of the trans just to clear drive shaft here. And then that thing is threaded in between the trans oil pan and the engine oil pan. And that's where we really started to draw the tubing to the subframe and away from the engine. But you can see the routing here. So here's our passenger side, sparing the starter area. And then you can see where the driver's side connects. This thing merges, right? So we go 3-inch, 3-inch, merge into a Y collector. This is all JMD tube. And then everything's gonna start to go 3.5. But you can see already like the packaging, it's pretty spicy in here. You can see the subframe all finished, and now we have all the tabs. So all tabs with nut plates for the subframe. And then it starts to get even crazier. So let me readjust. Here's just another shot of this thing. So obviously passenger side, driver side. The big merge. Then we have a resonator hiding in there. And then look at the transitions. All the way out the back. So I'm gonna keep following this thing as it snakes through. So once the driver's side comes over to the passenger and merges, then we're going right alongside the trans. Just right on top of the skid plate. Then we have right by the transfer case. That's the only part we could get through. It's like almost in between the pinion. V-band, I mean, obviously all the welding was dialed. Sean did a really good job on this. Everything's just really nicely appointed. And you can see the brackets, so all brackets with rubber isolators on everything. And you see factory provisions, so that there's, let's just go back here, so there's a resonator. I'm sorry if this is confusing you guys. There's a resonator here, a resonator there, and then a 24-inch muffler too. So Alan didn't want this thing to be all loud, and I totally respect that. Loud things get kind of old unless they're things that are just toys. So everything is V-banded, so it can come out where you're not having to take other parts like the cradle or something out just to get the exhaust off. This bracket that holds the second resonator is just factory provisions for the cross member that came with the truck. So you see that everything's stainless. It is followed up with a big muffler, all from JMD, and then another V-band, another mounting bracket there. This thing kicks to go over there, clear the housing in the rear end, and then it exits over there, and we'll cover that too. So another thing to note is the profile of like the muffler. Obviously you can see the frame here. So where I'm at right now is I am at the driver's side rear wheel opening. You can see the frame, and then look at all the exhaust and stuff is above the plane of the frame. So there is no contact point. And obviously you can see the fuel tank hangs way lower anyways. And so this is our portion that's going to go above the axle. And obviously you can see the tab, your last mounting part, and then we have a really nice notch out of the exit here. So that's our 3.5-inch exit. While we're here, the rear cradle is in here. It's kind of a component cradle, so it not only acts as a structural piece of this chassis, but it also houses the battery, a big ass compressor, and the tank, the compressor air tank. These will all be in here. This is where I talked about that skid going, and we'll also have UHMW on here. And again, this is what we're using for, we're not using nuts or like welded nuts anymore. We are using nut plates for everything. That just comes with every build and every project. One thing I want to touch on too, before we escape the depths of this thing, as far as the exit on the exhaust, so you can see the cradle, it's an asymmetrical kind of hitter in here. There's another tie-in from this portion to the panhard, just for extra support. And obviously you can see our like industrial air compressor there. That's probably the biggest, baddest compressor I've ever seen on a vehicle. But this exit is just going to be really nice because it's built right now to be 5/8 of an inch above the sea level or the plane of the mounting surface for the skid. So what we're going to run is 1/8 inch of aluminum here. It'll be steel in the front, but 1/8 inch, and then a 1/2 inch of the UHMW. So when that's all stacked on here, this will be completely flush. So it's going to have a really nice kind of exit there, where it'll be all flushed out. And obviously we're going to trim the UHMW a little more, just for meltdown purposes. The other thing I didn't include, I don't think, is we tabbed everything under here. So back to this crazy cradle. Oh, there we go. We got just tabs for the skid, all welded and done on here, and they're in a really nice grid pattern. So once they go on, everything will hit really nice. And we have templates done for that. So we're gonna do cold roll 1/8 inch steel as the first layer here, and then UHMW on everything else. right, just to jump to the whiteboard really quick, this is my way of just getting a visual, especially with the guys, to just look at things and objectives to get done, besides just on a piece of paper or something, or in my head. I don't think that's really an efficient way to run a business. So, limit straps for the front can't go on until the axle goes back on. These axles are so gnarly and heavy and big that we just try to bank on as much stuff as we can when the axle goes on or comes off, so we can avoid having to do that a bunch of times. But we're gonna do all the hard lines. Well, we'll do all the brakes on the car. So hard lines and soft lines, mixed and used appropriately where it's necessary. Rear sway bar links to axle, fair lead mount, bumper. So there's a lot of tube work in the front, but it's actually not like a bumper treatment. So we need to have a fair lead integrated into there. And then I'm gonna do digital design sketching to just get like an optimal shape where we add to the tube work that's there. So that's that. Bump cap skids we talked about. Weld front of truck 100%. Once everything is done in the front of the truck and we're not moving in and out of there and doing all the crap we're doing, then I will final weld and cap everything on the frame and the tube work that's done. Rock sliders, that's what I'm gonna go talk about next. We talked about underbelly skid plates, hood hinges, latches. So the hinges are on now, they're relocated because we're using a different hood. So we had to change the spread of the hinges with custom brackets. That's done. Latches, we're going to use an arrow catch. Just a really standard flush mount kind of latch. Looks kind of aircrafty, but they're like a composite construction with an aluminum pin. Front reservoir mounts will go on the back of the cross member. That's something that once the axle goes on, the shocks go on, we will put the reservoir mounts on, and that's just a simple thing. It's like saddles, just little fabricated saddles you get. Washer fluid and overflow tank. So those two items on a factory Jeep come integrated together, and for packaging issues we just need to not have that huge bulky guy and have a redundant washer fluid tank and a redundant overflow tank. The washer fluid tank is going to need like a OEM sensor bung put into it just for fluid level, and the overflow tank is pretty easy to do. Front bumper D-rings, so that's going to be kind of integrated into our fair lead mount and just whatever bumper treatment. Rear tie down points we talked about. So the front bump pads, just like the rear of the truck, on the chassis, it's got strike pads, just reverse bump stop situation. So instead of a bump stop being on the chassis and striking onto the axle or suspension, it's suspension mounted, unsprung weight, striking into the chassis and being able to articulate that. It just made sense and it's packaged perfect. So that's what we get. But getting to that, the front needs to have the same kind of treatment as the rear, just a little bit more of a strike because the articulation is pretty gnarly on this thing. Front inner fenders is something I'm going to take on. So the rock sliders and the fenders are like things that I'm brewing up that I'm going to sketch and get optimal design with. Just like you'd think with the inner fenders, it's just going to be sheet metal, almost engine compartment containment panels. That one felt really complicated, but we'll just skin it like we did like a pre-run truck or something, where it's just kind of quarter turn fasteners, mesh breakup wherever we can get it, bead roll if necessary. That'll be like a really nice treatment, and then it'll kind of match what we have going in the back. What I wanted to go show you guys was the ideas I have for the rock sliders, which we're going to do. We looked at just running an aftermarket rock slider, but we're at the point with the Jeep now where if you just take someone's part and put it on there, especially like a big fabricated part, it's not going to make sense. This is pretty much an MCD1 constructed Jeep, one-off, completely designer fabricated kind of situation. So hit rock sliders, and then we're going to go look at our top trinket, if you will. While I put this down, what I was talking about, you guys. So Total Innovations hood got some very good shapes in it and design. The one thing I really like is this portion where it's open, and it just happened that we fit the air filter in there, so that's super dialed. The other treatment that we added to this thing to kind of keep the theme going, this is another design feature of the hood, and what we did is we upgraded these fenders. I think they're JL, but please don't press me for this. Alan, we wanted to get a little more wheelbase out of this thing, and we wanted this hood to fit. So there was modifications we had to do to tie the hood and fender program into the cab program. But there is this really nice design feature here, which is like a cut, almost a sculpted shape change out of here. And we thought about like doing a trim piece in here, but what made more sense is just to get some of that poly mesh in there. So it just ties in. Obviously it's just a bolt-on thing, but it's a nice little treatment and a fill for that. So part of the rock slider program, I just wanted to kind of go over. Right off the bat, we want to get structure. Alan's always like, we got to build something where I can put the full weight of the vehicle on the sides, on the, the rocker portion of the truck. So right when I look at it, there's like two hard points. Obviously there's the fender tie in here, and there's the miter for the front fender tie in here. So I mean, they're both miters, but this one's tying kind of into the body. This one's going right to the frame. The rear is higher than the front, so you're already going to get this angle. Now that's not terrible, but I think what we want to do is I'm going to run 1.5 inch tube on this stuff. So we'll make this portion removable. We'll probably have to do tube connector, and then we'll get this guy, we'll get like a parallel 1.5 inch tube going right about to where the rear link pivot is, and then we'll put a kick in it. So that can go up right here and then over there. What that gives us for design is we have the parallel here, and then it can kick right where we're going to land a tube, and we can put structure. We can have that go right to where that kick's going to go up to this miter. On top of that, this is pretty much no man's land where I don't think we can do much here. We can tie something here to the body mount, which is structural, and then we can just lace this thing. So we can run maybe another tube. So it'll be tube with a bend, and then like another guy lower here, right into like a tie-in tube, and maybe just like another standoff in the middle. But I just wanted to kind of show you guys where I'm at with this thing, so then when we look at it next time, we can really get a like a solid final design that's been executed already. So that's that. Let's go look at something else. So, our exterior styling on this thing, I mean, I know there's like a lot of chassis work. Everything has design to it, and that's obviously what we are really pushing for with this stuff, is functional design. But the exterior of this thing is really like, it's just, you don't get much. You get like, for a Jeep, you get kind of your tire size, your ride height, your bumper treatments front and rear, and your fender treatments, which are really your wheel openings. And that's what's most profound with this truck, is the wheel openings and the very clean kind of streamlined trim that's on them. With that, we have our front opening on the hood that we showed, and a couple of the mesh openings on the sides. And those are all like features that your eye will pick up. I mean, obviously the biggest one, which you'd call like your primary or your focal point of the vehicle, would be from far away. What do you see from far away? And you'd see the wheel openings and the tires. And then when you start to look at it, you kind of start to identify stuff. So the details are secondary read, which means just what your eyes would read as the second thing. And with that, the cowl, the windshield cowl, or the wiper cowl, is kind of our final piece to the exterior here. And with that, there's a couple things that this needed to be here, not really for just aesthetics, which yes, it is a nice piece to have. It's a nice finish piece, but we're putting a set of fenders and a hood onto a cab, which you'd think is relatively the same, but there is things that are different that prevent just a streamlined way of install and swap. And this wiper cowl piece would not work for the application. So what we have here is we have relocated hinges. We also have a winch control over there, which I'll detail out in a second. And we have just a different spacing altogether as far as the radius that comes out for this hood and this fender. So what we constructed was a formed 1/8 inch aluminum trim wiper panel, whatever you want to call this thing. But it's a nice addition. It kind of finalizes the exterior of the car. These shapes that we got from this stuff are really just out of functionality. Like it's the same thing with the wipers, you know, like when these cycle, I don't want to do that without the power hooked up to them. But when they cycle, this shape is exactly to that spec. And getting in just enough design where it makes sense. So this is kind of just our last little finishing piece here besides the bumper treatment. These kind of unique little openings here, this is specifically for a finger. So you can fit most fingers. I don't think you can fit that thumb in there. That's a pretty wild thing. But that's your winch controller module in there. So it's remote from the winch. And then there's also the, the plug that goes here for the remote. So that's built into the cowl, but it's really hard mounted into the body down here, and it's flushed, and it's a nice piece. Besides these two guys, I mean, you have your traditional wiper opening, and then you just have some ventilation here. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mounting surfaces to keep this thing in line. So it's a good finishing piece. So that's kind of our last portion we have right now. Like I said, this is our last update before completion. I'm gonna knock off everything on that list, and then we're gonna film our last final close to the Jeep and Alan's vehicle. It's been a privilege working with Alan and Total Innovations, and it's been a special project. And that's the thing, is we don't need to work on pre-runners or race trucks or any of that. It's just building unique things. Cool shit, Fox. So thank you guys so much. Like, comment, subscribe. Have a great day.